This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good afternoon. We are coming on the air right now because President Trump is in Paris about to hold a press conference with the French president. There you see him, Emmanuel Macron, the youngest man ever elected president of France, President Trump, the oldest man ever elected president of the United States. President Macron has begun to talk. Let's listen in.
Today, he accepted the invitation I extended a couple of weeks ago in order to invite him to join the ceremonies of the 14th of July tomorrow. I think it is both a symbol and very important that the President of the United States could be with us tomorrow on the occasion of our National Day and attend a military parade which will
President of France, they're explaining his invitation to President Trump. They will be watching a parade tomorrow to celebrate the French national celebration, Bastille Day. As he's speaking, I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, because, John, of course, this is the first press conference the president will be holding since that revelation that his son, Don Jr., during the presidential campaign, met with a Russian lawyer after receiving an email suggesting he would be getting incriminating information about Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. So far, when the president has been asked about this in other settings, he has doubled down in absolute defense of his son.
He has fully defended his son, George, but that story broke, the first part of that story broke on Saturday, and then we saw something extraordinary. The president did not appear in public for 4 consecutive days. We didn't see sight of him. He didn't make any direct comments on it until finally late yesterday afternoon. He talked to Reuters, and I was told this was a very hastily arranged interview. The Reuters reporter basically got a call that the president was willing to talk to him right now, and he said that most anybody would have taken the same meeting that his son Don Jr. took. He said he didn't know it happened. He hadn't heard about it until just a few days ago, but that there was absolutely nothing wrong with it, and that he believed that most politicians would have taken such a meeting in a heartbeat.
And as the president was saying that, his nominee for the FBI, Christopher Wray, was telling Congress that he would expect anyone having a similar meeting would call the FBI instead of accepting. And I want to bring in our chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross, as well. And Brian, it appears that this meeting grew out of a web of relationships that Don Jr. and his father had had for business for many years.
Yes, with a Russian oligarch, a billionaire who was a partner with Mr. Trump in the Miss Universe pageant in 2013. That's how the relationship began. And that person's rock promoter for his son, helped arrange the meeting, sent the email saying, we've got this information, it's from the Russian government. So a lot depends on what that promoter says actually happened. Was he making it up? Was he puffing? Or was it real? The other question I think that is key is, did the president ever get any word that this meeting was taking place? He gave a key speech after the initial email was sent saying, I'm going to give a speech and I'm going to reveal stuff about Hillary Clinton that would seem to be consistent with that email. Raised
a lot of eyebrows at that time. Once we learned about that, I want to bring in our senior justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, as well. Of course, the Trump administration, Trump campaign had denied any contacts with Russians throughout the campaign, and now appears they had a couple of dozen, including this meeting with Don Jr., and this will certainly become fodder for the special counsel, Robert Mueller.
George, everyone I'm talking to expects that the special counsel, Bob Mueller, will be all over this particular incident because, again, the email suggests that senior officials involved in the Trump campaign were at least willing to listen to information regarding the Russian government having negative information on Hillary Clinton. The sources I'm talking to expect that he'll want to get those emails very, very soon, and at some point interview all the parties involved, George.
And John, Carl, let me go back to you. What may have sparked this whole story, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who now works in the White House, amended his disclosure forms to reveal this meeting as well. This is now the third meeting that Jared Kushner had with the Russian that he had not previously disclosed.
That's right. He amended, you're supposed to disclose all of the meetings you had with foreign nationals, and he included those 3 meetings, one with the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, during the transition, another with a Russian banker during the transition, and then this meeting during the campaign. Kushner's spokespeople point out, however, that he had meetings with over 100 different foreign nationals, 100 different meetings with foreign nationals that were all included in that amended disclosure form. It wasn't just Russians, in other words.
You've now got Democrats on Capitol suggesting he should lose his national security clearance, perhaps even be fired from his job at the White House.
Yes, no indication that that advice is being taken by the White House. In fact, I asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the deputy press secretary, about it yesterday, and she cut me off and said that Jared Kushner had done absolutely nothing wrong.
But, John, just to hit this, the president putting up a good front right now, put up a good front on Air Force One last night in a brief meeting he had with reporters on that flight. But these emails, this meeting, hit the White House like a bomb.
Well, it sure did. And you saw Republicans on Capitol Hill, who have largely defended the White House on virtually everything, throw their hands up and saying this looks really damning. Again, damning because you see, regardless of whether or not any actual information about Hillary Clinton was brought to that meeting, you see that Donald Trump Jr. was told that there was a Russian government operation to help his father in the election, to hurt Hillary Clinton, that he was told about that, and he made it very clear that he was eager to accept that help.
President Trump still maintaining the whole story a hoax perpetrated by Democrats. We want to go back to the press conference right now. It looks as if President Macron is wrapping up. President Trump will speak.
Work upon implementing his campaign promises, and as far as I'm concerned, I remain attached to the Paris Accord, and will make sure that step by step we can do everything which is in the Accord. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in summary what we've been talking about. We will continue with a friendly tone and informal one this evening regarding trade and security for both our countries, the fight against terrorism, stability in the Near and Middle East, in Libya or in the Sahel. I can say that we have a shared determination. The United States is extremely involved in the Iraq war, and I would like to thank President Trump for everything that's been done by the American troops against this background. But I would like him to know that I am fully determined to act together with him in this respect. Fully determined. I very much want both our countries in these matters to increase their cooperation in the coming month, because the threat we are facing is a global one. Our enemies are trying to destabilize us by any way, and I believe that this is very much at the heart of the historic alliance between our two countries, and which fully justifies the presence of President Trump today and tomorrow in Paris. Thank you. Thank you, dear Donald. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, President Macron. And Melania and I are thrilled to join you and Mrs. Macron. This is a wonderful national celebration, and we look very much forward to it. It'll be spectacular. Tomorrow, Bastille Day. We're honored to be here in your beautiful country, and it certainly is a beautiful country, with its proud history and its magnificent people, and thank you for the tour of some of the most incredible buildings anywhere in the world. That was a very beautiful thing to see. Thank you. When the French people rose up and stormed the Bastille, it changed the course of human history. Our two nations are forever joined together by the spirit of revolution and the fight for freedom. France is America's first and oldest ally. A lot of people don't know that. Ever since General Lafayette joined the American fight for independence, our fates and fortunes have been tied unequivocally together. It was a long time ago, but we are together. And I think together perhaps more so than ever. The relationship is very good. This visit also commemorates another milestone. 1 century ago, the United States entered World War I. And when the president called me, he had mentioned that fact 100 years ago, and I said, Mr. President, I will be there. That's a big, important date, 100 years. We remember the tens of thousands of Americans who gave their lives in that valiant and very difficult struggle. We also pay tribute to the heroic deeds of the French troops whose courage at the Battle of Marne and countless other battles will never be forgotten by us. More than 1 million French soldiers laid down their lives in defense of liberty. Their sacrifice is an eternal tribute to France and to freedom. French and American patriots have fought together, bled together, and died together in the fight for our countries and our civilizations. Today we face new threats from rogue regimes like North Korea, Iran, and Syria, and the governments that finance and support them. We also face grave threats from terrorist organizations that wage war on innocent lives. Tomorrow will mark 1 year since a joyous Bastille Day celebration in Nice turned into a massacre. We all remember that, how horrible that was. We mourn the 86 lives that were stolen, and we pray for their loved ones. We also renew our resolve to stand united against these enemies of humanity and to strip them of their territory, their funding, their networks, and ideological support. Today, President Macron and myself discussed how we can strengthen our vital security partnerships. We just had a meeting with our generals and our representatives, and it went very well. France has excellent counterterrorism capabilities. The French troops are serving bravely in places like Mali to defeat these forces of murder and destruction. The United States and our allies strengthen our commitments to defeat terrorism. We're also making tremendous progress earlier this week with the strong support of the United States and the global coalition. Iraq forces liberated the city of Mosul from ISIS control. Now we must work with the government of Iraq and our partners and allies in the region to consolidate the gains and ensure that the victory stays a victory, unlike the last time. Last week, the G20 leaders also reaffirmed the right to sovereign nations to control their borders. We must be strong from within to defend ourselves from threats from the outside. The nations of the West also face domestic challenges of our own creation, including vast government bureaucracy that saps the strength from our economies and from our societies. For this reason, I applaud President Macron on his courageous call for that less bureaucracy. It's a good chant, less bureaucracy. We can use it too. And a Europe that protects its citizens. We did not become great through regulation. And in the United States, Mr. President, we also have cut regulations at a level that we've never seen before. So we're very proud of that over the last 6 months. But by allowing our people to follow their dreams, that's what it's all about. To achieve these dreams, however, we must also confront unfair trade practices that hurt our workers and pursue trade deals that are reciprocal and fair. Both President Macron and I understand our responsibility to prioritize the interests of our countries and, at the same time, to be respectful of the world in which we live. We live in a very complex world. We have to respect it. The United States remains committed to being a leader in environmental protection while we advance energy security and economic growth. The friendship between our two nations and ourselves, I might add, is unbreakable. Our occasional disagreements are nothing compared to the immortal bonds of culture, destiny, and liberty that unite us, so strongly unite us also. As long as we have pride in who we are, where we've come from, how we got here, and what we've achieved as free and democratic nations, then there is nothing we cannot accomplish together. France helped us secure our independence. A lot of people forget. In the American Revolution, thousands of French soldiers fought alongside American troops so that, as Lafayette said, liberty would have a country. Ever since then, courageous heroes from both nations have fought for the same noble values and the same righteous cause. Tomorrow, the French tricolor will once again wave proudly alongside the American stars and stripes. Our brave soldiers will march side by side, and we will all be inspired to protect and cherish the birthright of freedom that our ancestors won for us with their sweat and with their blood. President Macron, thank you for inviting Melania and myself to this historic celebration. And to you and your spectacular country, may God bless France, and may God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Très bien. Nous allons prendre, je crois, 4 questions.
Very well. I think we will be taking 4 questions.
Et ni le président Trump ni moi-même n'avons.
Neither President Trump nor myself have a microphone.
Alors.
He's getting first question, President.
Voilà. Allez-y.
Messieurs les présidents, bonjour. Alison Tassin.
A question from LCI. Sure. The question, first of all, President Macron, regarding what you said on the occasion of the press conference together with Chancellor Merkel. Do you still hope that President Trump, or did you still hope that President Trump could change his mind regarding the Paris Accord? And now, President Trump, is it possible for you to come back to the Paris Accord and change your mind? Next, regarding your relation, how would you describe it today? What about the dinner tonight? Is it going to be a dinner between friends? Well, regarding climate, well, we have a number of disagreements, which are in particular due to the commitments taken by President Trump vis-à-vis his during the presidential campaign. So did I. I'm aware of how important that is, but we therefore talked about our disagreement. And we actually discussed the matter even before President Trump reached a decision. Next, should that have an impact on the discussions we are having on all other topics? No, absolutely not. This is the reason why we share the same views and some major common goals on many other topics, or all other topics, which we've been discussing today, and we shall move forward together. Next, well, of course, the President Trump will tell you about it, but he's made a number of commitments, and we're going to be working together. And my willingness is to continue to work with the United States and President on this very major topic. I understand that it's important to save jobs. That being said, we shall leave the United States of America work on what is its roadmap and continue to talk about it. So today there's nothing new and unprecedented, otherwise we would have told you about it. But I believe there is a joint willingness to continue to talk about this and try and find the best possible agreement. As far as I'm concerned, I remain extremely attached to the framework of the Paris Accord, which has been a major international breakthrough, and it is within that framework that I'm working on our priorities, including for the European Union. Lastly, as you know, I never very much want to comment who we are and what we're doing personally, but I can tell you that this evening at the Eiffel Tower it will be a dinner between friends, because we are the representatives of two countries which have been allies forever, and because we've been able to build a strong relation which is dear to me, because it matters a great deal for both our countries. It will therefore give me great pleasure to have dinner together with you tonight.
I think that I can reiterate, we have a very good relationship, a good friendship, and we look forward to dinner tonight at the Eiffel Tower. That'll be something special. And yeah, I mean, something could happen with respect to the Paris Accord. We'll see what happens. But we will talk about that over the coming period of time. And if it happens, that'll be wonderful. And if it doesn't, that'll be okay too. But we'll see what happens. But we did discuss many things today, including the ceasefire in Syria, and we discussed the Ukraine. We discussed a lot of different topics. We briefly hit on the Paris Accord. and we'll see what happens. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Merci, Mr. President. Mr. President, your FBI nominee said if someone in a campaign got an email about Russia like the one that your son Don Jr. received, that they should alert the FBI rather than accept that meeting. Is he wrong? Also, were you misled by your team in not knowing about this meeting? And Mr. President, thank you very much. You have heard President Trump say that it may have been Russia, it may have been others who interfered with the U.S. election. Is President Trump taking a hard enough line on Russia as you see it? Merci.
Well, I'll start off by saying, first of all, I believe that we will have a great FBI director. I think he's doing really well. And we're very proud of that choice. I think I've done a great service to the country by choosing him. He will make us all proud, and I think someday we'll see that, and hopefully someday soon. So we're very proud of him. As far as my son is concerned, my son is a wonderful young man. He took a meeting with a Russian lawyer, not a government lawyer, but a Russian lawyer. It was a short meeting. It was a meeting that went very, very quickly, very fast. Two other people in the room, I guess one of them left almost immediately, and the other one was not really focused on the meeting. I do think this. I think from a practical standpoint, most people would have taken that meeting. It's called opposition research or even research into your opponent. I've had many people, I have only been in politics for 2 years, but I've had many people call up, oh, gee, we have information on this factor or this person or, frankly, Hillary. That's very standard in politics. Politics is not the nicest business in the world, but it's very standard where they have information and you take the information. In the case of Don, he listened. I guess they talked about, as I see it, they talked about adoption and some things. Adoption wasn't even a part of the campaign. But nothing happened from the meeting. Zero happened from the meeting. And honestly, I think the press made a very big deal over something that really a lot of people would do. Now, the lawyer that went to the meeting, I see that she was in the halls of Congress also. Somebody said that her visa or her passport to come into the country was approved by Attorney General Lynch. Now, maybe that's wrong. I just heard that a little while ago, but it's a little surprised to hear that. So she was here because of Lynch. So, again, I have a son who's a great young man. He's a fine person. He took a meeting with a lawyer from Russia. It lasted for a very short period, and nothing came of the meeting. And I think it's a meeting that most people in politics probably would have taken. Mr. President?
Yes, to answer your question, I will.
Bien, pour répondre à votre question, je ne vais pas me mêler à la politique interne des États-Unis.
Not to interfere in the other's domestic life.
What a good answer that is.
And I do believe that both of us have direct relationship with Russia. President Trump had more than 2 hours meeting with President Putin during the past G20, the last G20, and myself, I had 2 very long meetings with President Putin, the very first one in Versailles and the second one during the G20, and this relationship is very important. We have a lot of disagreements. We have a lot of discrepancies, obviously, with Russia. But in the current environment, especially in the Middle East, it's a necessity to work together, to exchange information, to share these agreements, and to try to build solutions. So that's my relationship with Russia, and we don't have, obviously, the same relationship as the one with the US, but that's a long-standing relationship with Russia as well, and I think it's important that both of us have direct discussion and contact with President Putin.
One of the great things that came out of that meeting, by the way, even though it's not part of the question, was the fact that we got a ceasefire that now has lasted for, I guess, Mr. President, almost 5 days. And while 5 days doesn't sound like a long period of time, in terms of a ceasefire in Syria, that's a very long period of time. And that was a result of having communication with a country. So during that 5-day period, a lot of lives have been saved. A lot of people were not killed. No shots have been fired. in a very, very dangerous part of the world, and this is one of the most dangerous parts of Syria itself. So by having some communication and dialogue, we were able to have a ceasefire, and it's going to go on for a while. And frankly, we're working on a second ceasefire in a very rough part of Syria. And if we get that and a few more, all of a sudden you're going to have no bullets being fired in Syria, and that would be a wonderful thing. Mr. President, you have a question?
Troisième question.
Oui, bonsoir, Monsieur le Président. Mathieu Coach.
Third question from BFM TV, a question to President Macron. You went to Lausanne in order to support Paris' bid for the Olympic Games, and on this occasion you somehow criticized President Trump's policy without naming him. You said that France made a very clear choice to leave its border open and not to build walls to protect its people. Do you condemn the Muslim ban and the building of a wall between the United States and Mexico? Regarding Syria, as it was just mentioned by President Trump, does France stand ready to talk directly with Bashar al-Assad in the negotiation that you mentioned?
You've mentioned a friend, Jim. We told you that Paris is no longer Paris. You were implying at the time that Paris was not safe anymore. You've also said that France and Germany are infected by terrorism and, quote, it's their fault because they let people enter their territory. Those are very strong words. Would you repeat them today? And do you still believe that France is not able to fight terrorism on its own territory? Thank you.
You better let me answer that one first. That's a beauty. He's the one that asked the question. That wasn't even one of my picks. You know what? It's going to be just fine because you have a great president. You have somebody that's going to run this country right. And I would be willing to bet, because I think this is one of the great cities, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And you have a great leader now. You have a great president. You have a tough president. He's not going to be easy on people that are breaking the laws and people that show this tremendous violence. So I really have a feeling that you're going to have a very, very peaceful and beautiful Paris. And I'm coming back. You better do a good job, please. Otherwise, you're going to make me look very bad.
And you're always welcome.
Thank you.
Sur la première question, j'ai répondu.
Regarding the first question, like I said, I believe that the discussions that we've had today is the proper answer to terrorism. And the right answer is strengthen cooperation between our services. Never-ending fight against terrorists, no matter where they are. This is what I was referring to. This is what we are working on actively together. So in this respect, there is no difference and no gap between the French and the American positions. When I have something to say, I say it clearly, and I do say who I'm aiming at. And when I refer to those who've been my opponents in the French political battle, I also mention the names. So let us not mix up everything. And regarding the fight against terrorism, I think that the right approach is to have a strengthened cooperation in the field of intelligence, is also to be working together on all the theaters of operation where we are, and I think that the decisions we've reached, they will enable us to do more. Next, your question regarding Bashar al-Assad, which is an important one. Let me put it simply. Indeed, we now have a new approach of Syria, because we want some results and we want to be closely working together with our partners, including the United States of America. We have one main goal, which is to eradicate terrorism, no matter who they are. We want to build an inclusive and sustainable political solution. Against that background, I do not require Assad's departure. This is no longer a prerequisite for France to work on that, because I can only tell you that for 7 years we did not have an embassy in Damas, and still we have no solution Next, we also have a common red line together with President Trump. He intervened before I was elected, and I said it to President Putin after my election: no use whatsoever of chemical weapons. Any use will lead to an attack against a reaction regarding the storage places. And next, we also want humanitarian corridors. Also, we want to build a sustainable political stability for Syria. This is our roadmap. In order to stick to it, we need a diplomatic initiative beyond our military actions. This is what we've been agreeing upon because we want to take an initiative with the members of the Security Council and a number of countries involved in the process in the matter. Of course, there will be representatives of Assad that will enable us to put in place the roadmap for after the war. But there will also be representatives of the Syrian opposition and people with different backgrounds, and we will talk to all of them against that background. One last question for an American journalist.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Phoenix TV of China. Ma question est adressée à deux présidents. Monsieur le Président Macron, vous avez eu la première rencontre.
For both presidents, Mr. Macron, you had your first meeting with the Chinese president during the G20 summit. What will France do? How will France cooperate with all of these areas with China? And what do you think personally of Mr. Xi Jinping?
President during the G20 summit, and how do you want to continue to work with China, and what do you personally think about Mr. Xi Jinping? Thank you very much.
Well, he's a friend of mine. I have great respect for him. We've gotten to know each other very well. A great leader. He's a very talented man. I think he's a very good man. He loves China, I can tell you. He loves China. He wants to do what's right for China. We've asked him for some assistance with respect to North Korea. Probably he could do a little bit more, but we'll find out. We're now working on some trade deals. He's been very nice. He's let, as you know, beef go back in. Certain financing go back in, credit card financing, and various other things go back in at my request, which is a great thing for our farmers. So a lot of good things are happening, but we're going to be working on some very major trade components. But President Xi is a terrific guy. I like being with him a lot, and he's a very special person. Okay, thank you.
J'ai eu le premier entretien physique après une discussion téléphonique.
I first talked to President Xi over the telephone, then I got to meet him in the margin of the G20 summit in Hamburg. Early next year, I will be traveling to China. We've agreed to it. So I cannot say that he's a friend of mine or that I know him very well, because I very much want to say things as they are. But we had some initial contacts which were extremely fruitful and positive. I have a lot of respect for President Xi, and I would like to say that over the past few months he did express his willingness to have a vision for multilateralism and wanted to commit himself on a number of topics. I think that many of us remember his words in Davos, and he there very strongly expressed his vision of the role of China. We have a number of joint commitments, including on climate. He's very committed to that, and he told me that he wanted to do more in the field, and I can only be happy about it. He wants some strong cooperation. And like President Trump said, there are also the trade issues, and regarding a number of activities, there are issues, there are differences, but a joint willingness to sort them out. And as permanent members of the Security Council, we want to work together on all of the topics we've been discussing today. And China, in this respect, is a key partner in order to build peace all around the world. And I share what President Trump just said, that China is to play a very specific role regarding the rising tension, the growing tension in with North Korea, and it's important that China can play fully its role in the region. In summary, I think he's today one of the great leaders of our world, implementing a major and ambitious reform of China, society and the economy in China, and therefore my willingness in this respect as well is to have a strategic dialogue, the purpose of which is to continue to talk about the industry, civil nuclear industry, economic matters, and talk about any difficulties we may have together.
Bien, il me reste.
Very well. Allow me to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and once again thank President Trump for his visit, and I will be seeing him in a few moments.
That wraps up the press conference. President Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron right there. 4 questions, 2 from the French press, 1 from our Cecilia Vega, 1 from apparently Chinese television as well. You see the handshake there. The president also praising Paris, not repeating previous criticisms of the city after it had been beset by some terrorist incidents. I do want to go to Cecilia Vega, though, who asked the president the question about those meetings with Don Jr. and the Russian lawyer, the emails that precipitated the meeting. Cecilia, you asked the question yesterday. The president's nominee to direct the FBI said anybody who got an email like that should contact the FBI instead of accepting the meeting. The president says his son did nothing wrong, apparently.
An adamant defense of his son here in Paris, George, but he didn't really answer my question when I asked, pointed out that the fact that his FBI nominee said that essentially someone should report a meeting like this if in fact one was requested of a campaign. So he didn't directly address that. I also asked if he was misled, frankly, by his son-in-law, who was also in that meeting, by his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who was in that meeting, and of course by his own son. The president maintains that he did not know about that meeting until very recently, just a few days ago, he said. But look, you heard him. He said Don Jr., his son, is a good boy. He said that his essentially the White House defense, the president's defense of this meeting is that it didn't last very long. They didn't talk about he says they talked mostly about adoptions, and essentially he's saying nothing happened, so no big deal here, kind of nothing to see. That's the response from the White House right now. George, I also asked the French president whether he felt President Trump is taking a hard enough line against Russia, and you heard President Macron here say that he's not going to interfere in U.S. elections, so he's trying to stay very far, or U.S. relations rather, trying to stay very far away from this one today.
Of course, though, President Macron drawing a very clear line, warning Russia against any interference in French elections, which of course they've been accused of as well. Let me go to John Carl to follow up on this right now. John, the strategy basically give no ground on any front on Russia until proven wrong.
Give no ground whatsoever. It was striking to me how measured the president was in those comments because, George, what I have been told over the last few days in the White House as the president has been essentially holed up away from public view is that he has been livid about this story. He has been angry that the Russia story will not go away, deeply frustrated that his family had become entangled in the controversy, and had been lashing out at his aides, been lashing out at his legal team. He stayed away from public view. Now, the first time we see him in public taking a very firm line that his son did nothing wrong, but not seeing the flashes of anger and frustration. He seemed to be kind of brushing it off as something that's simply been blown out of proportion.
But not the end of it. Of course, is being investigated now by the Senate, by the House, and also by the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Thanks to all of you. We're going to turn now to our regular programming. Much more tonight on World News Tonight with David Muir. And you can get breaking news anytime by downloading the ABC News app. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Amna Nawaz in New York, continuing coverage now of President Trump's trip to France and that press conference you just watched with the French President Emmanuel Macron. In case you missed it, we'll bring you the highlights right here and get you up to speed on the latest headlines. With me here in New York, ABC's political director, Rick Klein. How you doing, Rick?
I'm great, Amna.
So let's talk about this a little bit. This couple, this odd couple, by some regards, they couldn't be more different in a lot of ways. But in that press conference right there, we saw a little bit of common ground between Trump and Macron.
This was Trump playing nice. Keep in mind that he supported Macron's main opponent in the French elections. And these are two individuals that are so different in temperament. And of course, President Trump, when he pulled out of the Paris Agreement, he says, I want to be president of the people of Pittsburgh, not the people of Paris. But he dialed back the criticism of Paris and of France, and of suggesting that it's not a safe place, and heaped a lot of praise on Macron. And I think this meeting shows a different kind of Trump on the world stage than the one that we've seen sometimes behind closed doors, sometimes on American soil. And I think he realizes the potential power of a friendship here. And Macron has played this very interestingly as well. We remember the body language at the last meeting, that handshake that seemed to go on forever. It seemed to me that President Trump was the one initiating a little bit of contact today, touching his arm at one point and trying to project some friendship.
A little body language expertise there from Rick Klein, too. Hey, let's bring in our colleague Matt Dowd, ABC's chief political analyst, who joins us now. Matt, I got to ask you this. I've been dying to ask you this since the first defense came out from the White House in response to those meetings that Don Jr. took with the Russian lawyer. We heard the president defending there in that press conference. The point is made again and again, hey, look, anybody would have taken those meetings. I would consider you, to have some experience in how these campaigns kind of run. Is that a fair defense for them to be making?
No. I mean, it's very telling that they're making that defense because it says how they look at politics. But I've done over 100 campaigns all around the country, and I have never been approached by something like this, would never even think of doing something like this. And the interesting thing, Amna, is I've also talked to people that did the Democratic and Republican campaigns for 1992, 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, and 2012. No one in any of those campaigns at any high level said they would have ever taken a meeting like this or ever even approached to taking a meeting like this. So this is highly unusual. You do get opposition research. It's usually from somebody, it's somewhere in the country saying, I know something about this, that's a county chair or something like that. But if somebody representing, supposedly, a foreign government, any foreign government, but especially an adversary, is highly, highly unusual. Never happened to me and never happened to any of my colleagues on either side of the aisle that I'm aware of.
And Dowd, I want to talk to you about this a little bit more. Before we lose her, let's go live now to Paris, though. Our colleague Cecilia Vega, ABC's chief White House correspondent, is there and asked the president a question about those meetings. Cecilia, you didn't quite get an answer to that, but what did you make of the president's response?
Well, as you said, he didn't actually answer the question. So, I am surprised by his measured tone in this today, and I am surprised that he is still administering this adamant defense of his son Don Jr. in taking this meeting. The defense from President Trump here and this White House essentially seems to be this was a short meeting. They talked about adoptions, no big deal, nothing really happened here. A lot of people in politics would have also taken this meeting, so nothing to see, moving on. That is the line at this point until I would assume something else comes of this, until something perhaps stronger comes of these allegations. We also asked President Macron if he views the White House's interactions with Russia, the president's stand on Russia, whether it is hard enough. And he didn't also answer that question. But he did, though, take a firm stand on Russia's interference with the French elections, as they've been accused of doing. But President Macron today saying that he's not interfering in U.S.-Russia relations, Amna.
All right, Cecilia Vega live in Paris on traveling there with the president. Let's head now to Washington, D.C. Our colleague John Carl joins us live from there. John, I got to ask you, this is the first time now we're seeing the president take questions from the press on this, although he did give, you just mentioned earlier, a couple of interviews in the last 24 hours. But there were a number of days in which we didn't hear from him after the news first broke. What do we know about what the White House was doing behind closed doors in those days?
Well, if you look at how this unfolded, the story of the meeting first broke on Saturday. That was the day that the president returned from his last trip to Europe, to Germany, the G20. He got there on, we saw him get off the helicopter on the South Lawn on Saturday, and then we did not see the president at all. No public events. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Very unusual to see a president in Washington, in the White House, and not appearing at all for the public to see what he's up to. I had been told by several aides that the president was angry. One said livid about the story, about the fact that the Russia story won't go away. He lashed out at his legal team, deeply frustrated, but not showing any of those frustrations. He wasn't on Twitter, not showing any of it publicly. And then it was late yesterday, we finally heard from him at all on this. Didn't see him, but heard from him when he did that interview with Reuters. and basically said that any other politician would have accepted such a meeting in a heartbeat. So I thought that it was quite interesting, and Cecilia referenced this, that although the president continued to push back, insist that Don Jr. did nothing wrong, that his tone was so incredibly measured. You didn't see any flashes of the anger. He was kind of brushing it off as something that would have happened, happens all the time in politics, has been blown out of proportion by the media. But let me tell you, the White House has been consumed by this story for days, and the president's strongest allies on Capitol Hill have been deeply concerned about what they saw in those emails.
And we'll be sure to hear more about it in the days ahead, I'm sure. Thanks to you, John Karl, down in Washington, D.C. Let's head over now to Pierre Thomas, ABC's Chief Justice correspondent. Pierre, I want to ask you about that question Cecilia Vega got to ask the president. She asked him about what his own FBI nominee said in his hearing yesterday. He said, look, if anyone's approached about a meeting like this from a foreign entity or foreign government, the FBI would want to know about it. Is that going to be problematic for the president and his defense moving forward?
Well, it likely will be. The FBI nominee, Chris Wray, yesterday made it clear that that kind of request, that kind of overture from a outside foreign national should be reported to the FBI. And the White House line that they're giving in terms of that this is sort of business as usual, I think it's fair to say that you're not really hearing that across much of Washington. Most people, including some Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, were suggesting that that kind of meeting is not the norm. And you just heard Matt Dowd, who's someone we all respect, say that this is unusual. And I think the bottom line of all of this is that the special counsel, whose office doesn't talk about what it's investigating and how it's investigating, but everyone I know who knows law enforcement and who knows counterintelligence investigations are telling me that they expect very soon that the special counsel's office will want to get those related emails and begin to figure out who had access to those emails and request additional documents to try to assess what exactly took place and make some determinations about it.
Pierre, you mentioned Bob Mueller's name there. His name came up quite a bit in the hearing yesterday, too. We haven't heard directly from him, though, and I'm sure we're likely not to for a while. But do we know anything about how the investigation is going or where it's going right now?
Well, what we know is that he's been staffing up, and what we have determined is that he's had a pretty large squad of investigators and prosecutors. We're told that he's hired at least 16 attorneys with more in the pipeline, and that there are, quote, dozens of FBI agents involved in investigating the Russia probe. So this will be something that will be investigated. And I think it's fair to say that the people associated with the campaign have never faced the scrutiny that they're going to get very soon. And these are experts in financial crimes. These are experts in investigating conspiracies, investigating the mafia. So again, formidable team being put together with incredible investigative powers and reach.
All right. Our thanks to Pierre Thomas down in Washington, D.C. Always good to talk to you, Pierre.
Pleasure.
Matt Dowd over in Austin, Texas. I'd love to get your take on this and pull some of these things together for us. What do you make of the White House's response, of their approach to all the information that comes out that seems to be coming out in drips on a daily basis now? Is this sustainable?
No, I mean, I think anybody looking at this objectively has to admit that the White House response to all of this has been very bad. I mean, the best response to any time you're in these kind of crises is to get all the information out, deal it with at one time, overcome it in the midst of it, hope there's nothing really bad in the middle of it, but get it all at one time. They seem incapable of that. Even when they were approached, it sounds like from the reporting, when this first broke, they had an opportunity to get it all out, but they didn't. They answered one specific question, put out a statement, and then they had to keep putting out more and more and more. And so I think this is, and it's also not, there's the other excuse that seems to be giving as well. They're newbies at this, they're rookies, it's a rookie mistake, they don't know, they haven't been involved in politics. This is not something that you need to have been involved in politics to know that you don't do. And that's part of the problem. The other thing I thought was funny is Donald Trump's, one of his things, he kept calling Don Jr. a young man, like he was like this little child or something, this young man over here. Let's remember, Donald Trump Jr. is older than the president of France. right? So this is not somebody that's not acquainted with how life works.
Matt Dowd, connecting the dots for us. Always good to talk to you, Matt. Thanks for making the time.
Good to talk to you all. Thanks.
Back here in New York, Rick Klein. Look, Dowd raises a really interesting point there. This defense of ignorance that, I didn't know how things work. We're new to this. As Mr. Trump himself there said, I've only been in politics for a couple of years, indicating we're kind of learning as we go here. It's a tough defense to make, though, when there have been blanket denials for so long.
First, I can't believe Matt Dowd is making me feel old. I'm older than both of them. My goodness. There were at least 3, by my count, questionable assertions in the defense that he issued. And it's a family-first defense. This is President Trump rallying behind his son. First, as Matt Dowd pointed out, the idea that anyone would take this meeting, I think, has been widely discredited by people that have worked in politics. And even as Cecilia pointed out in the question, the nominee for the FBI director said that shouldn't happen. Number 2 is this assertion that because it wasn't someone that worked for the Russian government, it wasn't a big deal. Keep in mind, that email chain shows Don Jr. thought he was meeting with someone who was being put forward on behalf of the Russian government, specifically as part, according to the email, of the government's attempt to try to help the Trump campaign. So whether or not she was actually an agent of the Russian government, she says she wasn't, Don Jr. thought she was. That, to me, signals the intent, and that's more important here. And then third, there was a suggestion by the president, which he even admitted he doesn't know if it's true, that Loretta Lynch, President Obama's attorney general, allowed her to enter the country. That is a reference, it seems, to a report that shows that the Russian lawyer got a special visa to come to the United States as part of a trial. That is a wild assertion at this point. And to suggest that somehow it's Obama's attorney general's fault that his son had this meeting at all seems like a pure distraction strategy that has nothing to do with the substance of a very real set of allegations that emerged from those emails.
And this is something we've seen from the administration before, right?
Yes.
An attempt to kind of muddy the waters, to distract from what questions are really being asked. But look, surrounding this very large issue are a lot of other things that this White House has to focus on and has to get done. This has become such, especially in the last 48 to 72 hours, such an overwhelmingly serious issue. How is it not consuming them? How are they able to continue working on everything else that needs to get done?
Well, they're not. And in fact, I think it's almost fitting that the Senate is talking about health care today and its path forward with President Trump 6 time zones away. That seems like it's hard for the course. He has been a non-factor in the big legislative push of the summer, and it's because they've been consumed by this. Now, you can also argue that his role would not necessarily be productive. The way that he trashed the House passed bill after the fact is still remembered on Capitol Hill. But this is the big kahuna. This is everything right now that the administration is dealing with. And the fact, as John Carl points out, he did not have a single public event on American soil between these foreign trips. That's how big a deal this was. He flies home on Saturday. It was the big story Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He doesn't come out again in public until he's back on foreign soil. That's peculiar behavior, and it tells you how focused they are on protecting themselves against this widening scandal.
I want to ask you a little bit more about this foreign trip, because it is such a big deal in terms of American foreign policy, and then get back to healthcare, because that is huge, and there's some very real things moving today on that. But this meeting, this press conference with Macron, we talked about earlier, these guys couldn't be more different in many ways, alike in many others. They're both pragmatists. They're both sort of transactional in a lot of different ways. What did we see there in terms of where we could see the U.S. and France actually kind of working together, and what seems to be sort of the new point of contact for America in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's telling that he chooses this invitation to accept. We found out recently that he won't be going to Great Britain at all this year, as a matter of fact. So I think that is a not-so-subtle jab at the British, and of course there's a tense relationship there, despite some commonalities. I think another part of this is that President Trump thought this would be a good invitation to take because it was a kind of a quick trip that had some nice perks to it. He gets a nice meal out of it, nice scenery seeing. I think his wife...
big military parade
the
as
big
well.
Parade.
Yep.
There's some just basic, like, this is not a bad trip to say yes to. You can imagine Melania and him talking about, hey, what do you think about Paris?
Couple days in Paris.
Couple
Sounds
days in
good.
Paris. Not bad if you can do it. But I do think, to that broader point, he seemed to signal to what he hopes will be a partner in Western Europe that there's a way to work on this. He wasn't trashing the Paris Climate Accord, right? He says, hope there's a way forward on that. If not, no big deal. A lot of praise from Macron, and the leadership says he'll be back. He hopes many times. I think all of that is the president waking up to how hard the job is and and where you look for some allies.
And it also strikes me, too, this is something we've talked about before. We see President Trump evolving and in some ways just kind of turning 180 from previous things that he said. Jim came up, his friend Jim.
His friend Jim. We don't even know who Jim, we still don't know who Jim actually is.
Jim goes by one name. He's like Cher and Madonna, just Jim. Jim had a problem with Paris. Paris is no longer Paris. President Trump has cited that before, but today he said, Paris is beautiful.
Paris
I'll
is Paris
be back.
again.
Paris is Paris. So there you go. That's where we are now. Let's talk about health care.
Yeah.
We are seeing for the first time now the new version of the Senate health care bill, part of their continuing journey to repeal and replace the ACA. What do we know? Give me the highlights.
Well, so far we've seen that this is an effort to try to reach out to conservatives far more than moderates. We know they don't have the votes. They didn't have the votes before. They had to make some major changes here. The big thing that they've done, a few things. One is that they're giving a lot more money to states and to fund opioid abuse in addition to that. That was one hole in this because there were cuts to Medicaid. That means for a lot of people that have been hit by this plague of opioid abuse, making additional financing available. They also made some additional financing available that would allow states to set different insurance rules that would potentially allow them to offer slimmed down programs under what the remnants of Obamacare. That is a big bridge to the right. That's about conservatives and conservative groups. They have wanted insurance companies to be able to essentially opt out and offer much slimmed down versions of the plan. But telling right now is that they still don't have the votes. Rand Paul on the conservative side says he's not going to vote for this. Susan Collins on the moderate side says she's not going to vote for this. That's 50. And they can lose no more. And there are enough undecided senators, including critically Dean Heller in Nevada, who had ads run against him, at least briefly, by the Trump team because of his opposition. He says he's still undecided. So this is still going to be a scramble. But I would also say they appear to be in striking distance. It doesn't look like an impossible task based on this. Some of the conservative opposition has melted away, and they at least have the opportunity to get this vote forward next week.
What is the timeline moving forward? We also hear every time about the CBO score. Does that matter as much as it did before?
It matters for Senate rules purposes, but I think because they got that initial one, this won't change things substantially. We're seeing some indications from the CBO of what they're talking about. There's going to be a whole raft of amendments that are offered and potentially considered next week. The deadline, though, that senators have set, and they shift these things all the time, is a vote next week, and that's what they're moving toward. But to even get to that vote, they have to clear a procedural hurdle. Right now, they don't have enough just for that. The so-called motion to proceed, they need a majority there. Right now, they are just on the cusp of getting that, to say nothing of the underlying bill.
Of course, our team here is going to be covering all the ins and outs and all the details as we learn about them. Rick Klein, thanks so much for being here. So good to have you here.
Love to be here. Thanks, Amna.
Thanks to all of you for watching as well. Remember, you can go to abcnews.com anytime for continuing coverage of President Trump's trip to France and also our continuing coverage of healthcare reform efforts on the Hill. Thanks for all. And for now, I'm Amna Nawaz. I'll see you back here soon.